Now, Rose Valland was one of the most highly decorated spies in World War II, credited with playing a leading role in saving thousands of looted artwork during the Nazi occupation. She was a Parisian art historian who spied on powerful Nazi leaders such as Göring over a period of 4 years. And Rose's information enabled soldiers to know what to look for when recovering the stolen artwork. She remains a relatively unknown figure in popular culture. Now, my next guest is aiming to change that. Journalist and author Michelle Young has uncovered more information about Rose's life, and Michelle's new book, The Art Spy, tells that story. First of all, Michelle, give us a sense of what it was that drew you to her fairly, well, if not little known, not as known as it could be, story.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a whole genre of French female or English female spies in books and in movies, and I really thought I had known them all. And I came across her in another book called Göring's Man in Paris, about Göring's art dealer, and she literally popped off the page in the few chapters she was mentioned. So I dug into her life, and I was really amazed that not much had been written about her, at least in the English press. Yeah.
Give us a sense about her role and how much of a significant role she had in risking her own life, monitoring what the Nazis were doing on a daily basis, and how it came about.
Yes, so she already worked at the Jeu de Paume Museum, which is next to the Louvre, and she was already an unpaid curator, and before then unpaid secretary. So she was pretty unnoticed in the space, and the Nazis were looking for a place to transport the looted art through, and they asked the head of the museums if they could use the Jeu de Paume. And so she happened to be there, and the Nazis felt and thought that she was merely a secretary, and that she knew how the heating worked and electricity and not much more. But in fact, she secretly spoke German. She was a well-trained art historian, had 3 degrees from art schools in France. And so she knew exactly what art was coming through, who owned it, and she took notes, and she also had a photographic memory. And so all these things combined made her a bit of the perfect spy for this exact type of events that were happening.
So she played the game, pretended she couldn't speak German.
Right.
And at one point she almost got caught out and lost her life.
Yes, she was kicked out of the museum several times by the Germans. One man particularly suspected her, but each time they needed her to come back for various reasons, and she talked her way back. And then in the end, she did have a death warrant on her back. Should she ever have crossed into Germany, the Nazis had put that on her.
And if anybody's unfamiliar with the sort of magnitude of her work, if anybody's seen The Monuments Men, the film with George Clooney and the Hollywood A-list in it, a lot of that work was down to her pinpointing where it was.
Exactly. She also took notes of what train numbers and cargo numbers the art was being transported, and where it was going in Germany and Austria into the salt mines and the castles. And so when the Allies arrived in France, after they spoke to her, they knew exactly where to look in Germany.
You also take a look at her gender, her sexual orientation, and how that sort of affected her and played out during that time.
Yes, so there were very few women, first of all, in the art world during this time. It was hard to break in, and especially if you were a woman not from the upper echelons of French society. And so she was a bit of an anomaly coming up in the art museum curator world, and which is why she was relegated as an unpaid secretary and then an unpaid curator. And she was not really formally made a curator until 10 years after World War II. And so there's that, and she was also lesbian. She was not out during this time period, but if you look at how she dressed and how she wore her hair, she was not of the norm. And so I think all these things considered, and including probably her very direct, brusque manner, alienated her from the powers that be. And so some of them very deliberately derailed her career before and after the war.
And there are other things that, aside from what's known about her and what she's famed for, that within digging into this book, you think actually the reader needs to know about this?
Yes, absolutely. I think one of the reasons people have not written about her yet is that they don't consider her a spy that was in the field. Those are the most dramatic, romantic stories that people are looking for. But in fact, she was in the field every day, and there are anecdotal stories and evidence that she also, snuck negatives out of the museum, followed people to find out where they lived, and so I think if you start to put together the crumbs of the story and you look into different sources that other people might not have looked at, you start to put a picture of what she was risking on a daily basis.
It's worth saying, although she's not a name in popular culture that is sort of currency, as it were, she is recognised. I think there are street names, there's a street name in Paris, in Grenoble as well. I think there's even
Yes.
a rose dedicated to her from the French government.
That's correct. And there's been a movement in France since the late 90s, I would say. So people like Emmanuel Pollack and other art historians and people in the art world have been trying to shed some light on her heroism. And so as a result, there have been plaques in streets, and even there's a postage stamp in France several years ago.
Now, I mentioned the Monuments Men, and I think there was a small role played by Kate Blanchett, who represented her. Obviously, one hope must be that somebody notices this and think, hang on, we must tell this story on a visual scale.
Yes, I've got a film agent looking to sell this story also to Hollywood. So I do hope so. I think her story is very exciting. I'm discovering many things that people have not found out before. So I think altogether, this is a story worthy of Hollywood for sure.
And briefly, if people want any more, I think you're at the Columbia Global Center on Monday, and it's an open event where basically Rose Valland, you'll be telling her story of anybody interested in any more.
Yes, so Monday night at the Columbia Global Center in Paris in the 6th arrondissement, it's a talk and discussion about her life and why she may be forgotten today.
Michelle Young, thank you. Fascinating to talk to you, and let's hope that name is imprinted more again in popular culture.
Yes,
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
That's the book, The Art Spy.